So my kids and I have this thing that we like to do where we go on Disney Plus, like if we're trying to find something to watch, and instead of finding something to watch, we just watch trailers forever. It doesn't matter if they're trailers for shows and movies that we've already seen or ones that are upcoming. Our favorites are the ones that like really pique our interest, and we will legitimately watch them over and over and over again. And it got me thinking, students look at the way we open lessons and units the same way that my kids and I look at trailers. The gateway activity is basically the trailer for what's to come in the classroom. And if it falls flat, that's the one that we're not going to finish, right? Like we're not going to finish watching that trailer. I have already lost most of our students before we even start.
Which is why we care so much about it. And so one of our very favorite strategies that we want to share with you right now is a gateway activity using picture books. Picture books are the perfect little intro to big concepts and themes. They're engaging in a way that's unexpected. Here's a fun fact. We have a whole lesson ready made for you and absolutely free to download that uses the book Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And we use it to introduce the genre of dystopia and all of the big ideas within it. So if you've ever been in the market for tricking and deceiving your students with something that's really engaging and fun, this is the lesson for you. Every single time we use Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs in the classroom, students are walking away intrigued. They're talking to each other. They're talking out the door about what happened in class. I mean, dreams really do come true. And they're thinking about what's coming the next day. All of these signs of a very successful gateway lesson.
And did we mention that the whole lesson is free? You can go and download it right now and come back to it whenever you are ready. Head to the show notes for this episode or go to shop.bravenewteaching.com/cloudy to download this lesson today. We can't wait to see how it works in your classroom. This episode is brought to you by Curriculum Rehab by us, the team here at Brave New Teaching. It is the first and only teacher PD of its kind, a course to help teachers like you by guiding you through creating your own personal framework for curriculum. You make it work for you, your students, and your unique situation because nobody else knows what the kiddos in your classroom need the way that you do. Curriculum Rehab takes all of the resources available to you, all of the lessons, the assessments, the activities, all of the texts, everything that could possibly be there for you, and it helps you organize what you actually need in order to attain your teaching objectives. These are the strategies that Amanda and myself have used in our own classrooms, have developed over very long years of teaching and figuring things out, combined together to create this framework and these strategies that we can guide you through. This course will give you the tools you need for a complete curriculum overhaul or to start from scratch. Wherever you are on that continuum, it does it all for you and with you on your timeline. So start today, do a little bit more in a couple of months, and then pick it up next summer. It's Teacher PD the way it should be on your own time. Head to curriculumrehab.com/course for more information, or just head to the show notes for this episode. We cannot wait to see you there. It's finally time to take control of what goes on in your own classroom and create the curriculum of your dreams. All right, let's get back into the show. Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome to another author interview. It's a very exciting time when a couple of book dorks like Amanda and myself get to sit down with people who make the very books that we love happen in the world for a living, right? It's just, it will never fail to captivate my attention when I get to talk to somebody who is a writer. Because as I sit here right now recording at my desk, I'm looking at a picture of me in like second or third grade where I'm standing in front of a pillar somewhere on a family vacation that says Writer's Square up above my head because I was so convinced that I was going to be an author from a very young age because I was so enraptured with stories and just I wanted to read all the books. I wanted to watch all the movies. I wanted to tell all the stories. Obviously, as you are listening right now and you know anything about me, I'm not an author, but I am a voracious reader. And I also love sharing a joy of reading and just consuming stories with students and basically anybody that'll talk to me. So talking to authors that like actually do the writing and the things is so freaking cool. Today, you are going to hear the interview that Amanda and I did with author Katie Bayerl, who is actually a former English teacher, which I feel like gives us all a little glimmer into, or just like a little glance into the world of the various things that those of us who do love stories can do, right? We talk actually in this interview about how she started as a ninth grade English teacher. And Katie found out that that just was not the journey for her. And she kind of fell into writing and like wrote a novel, and it just kind of happened. And obviously, like, good things have happened since then because she's now got a career as a professional author. She's also, though, still a teacher. She teaches quite a bit of creative writing, and she does workshops. She does special residencies. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to give you the little bio, but we do talk today about her new title release called What Comes After. But like so much of our conversation, as always, when we get to talk to authors, is about like what brought them here and where this book came from. Anybody can read a book with their class, right? Anybody can read a book. It's the joy that Amanda and I get out of it and bringing it to you all, the Brave New Teaching community, is hearing from the authors themselves of like where these characters in this world came from. I am particularly interested in bringing this book to my classroom because it brings really tough subjects like death, like rifts in families, to a young adult audience. It is a YA novel with humor. Like, it's a comedy. It's told in a comedic way. So hearing her talk about that, where that came from, how that came to be, is all part of what we talk about today. Katie is like I said, a former English teacher. She holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and she's also on the creative writing faculty at Grub Street. Her previous YA novel, A Psalm for Lost Girls, earned 2-star reviews and was a Texas Library Association selection, amongst other things. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts. She was delightful to talk to because we got to get into all sorts of different things. And she is one of those who is not currently in the education system, especially the public education system, but she understands it and she gets it. And that is refreshing as a classroom teacher, from my perspective anyways, to talk to somebody who really gets it. Yeah, I can't wait for you to hear and let us know, what you think. With no further ado, here is our interview with author Katie Bayerl. Cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a high school teacher from Southern California.
Join us after the show and happy hour to extend your BNT experience with instant access to our resources, workshops, and courses.
Visit shop.bravenewteaching.com/happy hour to join us today. We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. All right, everybody. We are very excited to welcome to the podcast author Katie Bayerl, who has some really cool things to talk about. I'm excited to talk about some of her work that she's done in classrooms, but first and foremost, we are here to talk about her work as an author. Katie, welcome to the Brave New Teaching podcast. Will you please start by just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself in your own words and what has brought you here today?
Well, I'm excited to be here with teachers because I started as a teacher. That was actually my first vocation and love. I started teaching when I was in high school. I was working in middle school programs and after school and summers, and went on to become a ninth grade English teacher. And that was wonderful in many ways, but it didn't go the way that I thought. And I don't, it's a little awkward to talk about here. I really admire wholeheartedly career teachers who are in there every day. And that's where I saw myself going. But for a number of reasons, including mental health, including a highly dysfunctional school, it fell apart in that moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about my book, What Comes After, today. Actually, an interesting piece to that is when I first started writing it, it was in the couple of years after I had left teaching. And it really was about experiencing that kind of death of a former self, of
Yeah.
an identity that had been so important, and kind of figuring out what comes next when the person you thought you were is no longer. I did discover down the road that there are other ways to be a teacher. And so I still identify with that part of myself. And I still do work in schools from time to time. And I teach in nonprofit settings too. But what happened in that aftermath was suddenly the world was cracked open and there were all of these other possibilities that I never would have considered. So, for example, I was up one night watching TV and I was watching Lifetime. I don't even know if that still is a network. And the movie version of Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson came.
Uh-huh.
And that was a book that I had used a lot in my classroom. And I just had this kind of lightning moment where I realized teenagers, books, these two great loves. What if I flipped how I work with these two things and become a young adult author? So I started working on my first novel that night, and I've been at that ever since. So it's been interesting and not at all what I would have expected. I don't think we tell teenagers or even 20-somethings kind of the circuitous route that a career can take, and all of the ways that who we are and what we love can kind of come back around and feed into the work. But that was where I started. And yeah, I don't know if I even answered the whole question there. Did I?
Oh, you absolutely did. That's
100%.
fascinating. Well, and I do have to tell you, like, as a career classroom teacher, I know that it is not, I've left the classroom and come back. It is definitely, if the setting isn't right, if the timing isn't right, there's no glory in damaging yourself, to like for the greater, like, and I can tell you that like our audience is either where you were right now, has been where you were, or is finding themselves getting closer and closer to that point. And so
Yeah.
hearing how honest you are about like it just didn't work. And it just doesn't work for everybody and that's to be said for many careers, right? Like, and I think
Absolutely.
and look at the success you found, both like career, like traditional career success. Absolutely. We're here talking about like your latest release, but we're also, it seems like you found a different purpose and joy also in the work that you can do. And what a great message for us to be able to share with each other. And then also with our students. Like you were saying, you just never know what path you're going to go on, even when you're so sure of what it's going to be. Like,
And I was that girl.
oh yeah,
School. Yeah, I was very focused. We learn, and you learn a lot about yourself, especially as you're growing up, and you're still growing up in your 20s. Your brain's forming. You're figuring out a lot about yourself.
oh yeah, I think I'm still growing up in my 40s. So there's that.
So, okay, so Katie, you find yourself, right, kind of like everything's changing and you're going to write your first book and we arrive at speculative fiction. How did that happen?
That was also kind of an accident. So I was starting out writing contemporary fiction because I love books like Speak, and I had a lot of other authors in my classroom, that Rita Williams Garcia and Walter D. Myers, and so that was where I naturally gravitated. But this was also in the post-Twilight era, when everyone had a book either about vampires or mermaids, and I was like, oh, okay, well, how would I do something that's not of this world? And Gabrielle Zevin had a book Elsewhere that came out around then, and it just knocked me flat. I loved it. And I realized in that moment, I had always been a very kind of philosophical kid, big questions, kind of figuring out how to fit those questions into a faith was my journey as a teen. And I thought, yeah, like, not vampires, but the other kind of dead people. That's what I can do. So I started playing around with what became what comes after, but also my first novel has a dead character in it. It's a little less speculative. It's about a maybe saint, some question of possibility of something other that we don't understand in our Western current framework.
That's so cool.
Dead people. It's my way of going after vampires. Just the other kind of dead.
Just
Okay,
yeah,
well,
just a
okay.
different.
So before we kind of get into, we have some like deeper, like philosophical, big teaching questions. Why don't you also give us kind of like the what comes after pitch? Like, give us like the story. Like, give us our teachers kind of what are we getting with the characters? What are we getting with the story? And what can they expect, right? With kind of
Sure.
like, what's your elevator pitch for your newest book?
Well, I'm still working on that because we're in the early phases. But it is a book about a 16-year-old who is shocked and appalled to discover that there's a life after death. She wakes up in a place called Paradise Gate, where she realizes quickly she's going to have to still deal with all of the messes of her life, including her mom, who also happens to have recently passed. It's my funny book. It is my wackadoo, philosophical, weird, playing with big ideas book. I actually started writing it before The Good Place aired, but it is kind of it's being compared there because I think it has big ideas, but also big characters and a lot of humor in it. And I got to infuse it with all of the questions/concerns I have about commercial self-help culture and all of the messages that teens and adults are getting inundated with all the time about how to succeed, how to be a better person, how to look good, how to feel good, and all that pressure. So it has social influencers, it has bad yoga, it has the suspect powers that be leading the show, and it has some revolution, which we can talk about too. But I had a lot of fun with it. I had a lot of fun with the world building. I had a lot of fun with Mari, and the relationship with her mom and her best friend in the world, Larissa, and Jethro, who's a loner boy who's full of some surprises. I think all of those tensions and relationships are very much similar to a contemporary novel where a character in the real world is working out relationship, working out connection to a family member that may not look as you'd hope or look like family. So, yeah, that's the long version of the short pitch.
No, it's great though, because we've come to realize that busy, especially teachers out there, most of our audience who are our listeners right now, want to bring in new stories and new voices to their classroom, new to them and just new in general. And it is so stinking hard to be able to take the time to really vet a title that we are trying to do that for them. So I think that like your description was very helpful. And in that same vein, a lot of what we do here is we talk about curriculum and teaching. One of our pillars basically is from an inquiry-based approach. And so what sorts of questions, or is there like a particular question that you could see teachers exploring with their students through what comes next?
There are probably like
What
three.
comes after? Sorry, I said the wrong word. I was like,
There are
wait,
about
I knew
three
I was
kinds of
wrong.
questions. No, it's okay. We're good. Um, so the first one I was starting to talk about before, I think there's so much pressure on teens, on adults, on teen girls, maybe are at the nexus of this, to do everything and be everything. That to get great grades, you go to the right college, you land the perfect career, figure out how to be a functional adult. We're all supposed to figure that out on our own. And we're supposed to look at the same time. I mean, right now, Instagram wants me to do face yoga. Like I'm getting all of these exercises I don't really understand what's wrong with my chin, but Instagram wants me to fix it. So I think one of like the biggest question of this story is how do you cut through all of that noise, all of the advice about how to look and feel good and appear successful? And how do you figure out what it is that you need to thrive? Like, how do I need to be my best self according to my definition of that? And what I might need may not be the same thing that you may need. There's also a big set of questions in the book about the individual versus community. I think we treat a lot of our challenges in life as if they're individual and as if the solutions all come from us or are on our own shoulders. But some things are bigger than that. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need a doctor. Sometimes we need friends. Sometimes we need medicine. Sometimes we need to really rethink the bigger system that's causing all of the angst and all of the stress. And I just think there's so many big questions that we ought to be talking about, and I know a lot of teachers are talking about right now with so many teens struggling with mental health issues. That's not on the individual. That is something bigger. There's something amiss. And I think teens can certainly be part of asking those questions too. But how do we look at that as a collective? How do we really think about where that pain comes from? And then where does the healing come from? Maybe it doesn't just sit with each of us as individuals. And then the third set of questions, which I think I'm kind of, they're all on the same path here. But I taught a curriculum a long time ago when I was starting out where the whole theme for the year was, how do you do the right thing in the face of injustice? And I think that's a big question that Mari needs to figure out. And she's slowly learning in this world where power sits and who is right and who is telling the truth. But it's this question of, what do you do if you find yourself in a situation where the rules are unfair, or you suspect that those in authority aren't acting in the best interest of those they're meant to serve or meant to lead? What can you do about it? And how do you find the courage to speak up?
What a treasure trove.
So there's a lot to play with. Those are all
Yes.
questions that I think about all the time. And I didn't mean to be thinking about them all as actively in February 2025 as I am, but they've become very potent questions right now too.
And to have a young protagonist, right, facing them is that much more beautiful, I think, well, especially for students, right? Like, it's one thing to give them adults that are processing through this, but it's another to give them a peer and watch that peer process through these things.
I mean, I think as adults reading young adult fiction too, I think one of the great things about the young adult experience and in fiction is that everything is being experienced for the first time. So there's that intensity and that honesty. So there's a real appeal. I think we're all grappling with these questions, and going through the experience through a teen's eyes can be really powerful.
Well, it's the remembering that it is, while we've already had many of our first understandings of the world, as adults, we're over and through a lot of the awakening that happens in adolescence. And like, as a teacher and as a mom, I have to remind myself, and reading YA is a lot of the way that I help myself stay focused on the fact that just because I know and understand it and have my own perspective does not and cannot belittle the very real emergence of new feelings and understandings and experiences in the young people that I'm with all the time, my own kids and other people's kids that I'm with for hours and hours and hours and hours every day. Right? Yeah. And it can get very easy sometimes to be like, oh my gosh, kids, just stop. Like, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. But for them, it is the biggest deal. And that's why reading young adult fiction, quite frankly, is what keeps me rooted in empathy, at least from an adult's perspective.
That makes sense. That's really cool to hear. Yeah.
I am wondering, one of the things too, we're trying to like paint a picture here is Marie and I love to teach novels on their own, like a whole class novel for a whole class novel unit. We also love to recommend books in kind of like a choice format. So if we were to recommend your book and then a handful of other texts alongside it, what are some other books you think that would make really interesting pairings, whether that's structurally or thematically, or what are some books that you would add to the list that would make sense together?
Well, what comes after is a weird book. So it kind of crosses boundaries and has, I think, different friends depending on how you look at it.
I love that.
If you look at it as an afterlife book, Gabrielle Zevin's Elsewhere. It's been out a little while, but I love that book. It's a really cool, very different framing of the afterlife. And if TV is allowed in the mix, I do think The Good Place would be a fun watch beside, because people for centuries have been looking at the afterlife as a construct for understanding the human condition. So how do you kind of look at these questions, these big what ifs that authors have been asking in the context of fiction? It could also be a read along with books about healing from trauma or reimagining the past, kind of reforming one's narrative in order to move forward. And a couple of my favorites in this category are Last Night I Sang to the Monster by Benjamin Alire Sands. I love all of his books, but that one is...
I do too. Oh, I love him.
Total gut wrench. I also really loved I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica Sanchez. That came out a few years ago. Those books, to me, felt like the truthiest truth about depression and coming through trauma and really trying to make sense of it. And I think that my story, while kind of wacky and funny and a different take on it, explores a similar kind of path. A third kind of category might be about young people who stand up for what's right, often against the odds. And I would probably pair it there with some dystopian novels. Like, it could be The Hunger Games. It could be Octavia Butler's Earthseed series or Lois Lowry's The Giver. But books where a young person comes to realize that the system is not what it seems and has to make a decision about what to do.
I was just thinking dystopia, even a touch of fantasy could pair. But I think when you said dystopia, that made it go in my head. Yeah. Like all the thought bubbles.
I didn't know. Yeah. When I was writing early chapters of the story, I did not know that's where it was headed. And one of my critique group members said, "This feels dystopian to me." And my brain just fell apart.
Yeah.
It opened up the whole story because I didn't know where it was headed. At that point, it was just a bunch of jokes. But now I had a path forward.
So
Well,
cool.
and aren't so many dystopian protagonists healing from some kind of trauma
Right.
and likely confronting the afterlife
Yeah.
in one way or another? I mean,
Yeah.
I love that. And you said revolution earlier, and that's such a powerful. I love that all three of these things are working together. And then there's this other sleeper piece here that you keep saying, but I think we haven't addressed really, is that you are bringing humor
Yes.
into the world here, and that is not a common way of addressing critique. I mean, at least not for YA. Like, we have so many great, like, satirical comedies for adults, right? Like SNL, all the late night shows. Like, there are so many brilliant satires that are constant and current and contemporary, but that we can't always share in class. Tell me a little, I know this is not necessarily what we prepared for, but I'm really curious about your lean toward a comedic and humorous approach. Was that on purpose, or was that also an accident?
I think it came out because I was playing. It definitely came out on the first try in the first pages. I love a good dark joke. Was raised Catholic. I don't know. I've been making jokes about death my whole life, I think. I love funny authors. I mean, I'm Amy King, or A.S. King is one of my favorite young adult authors. She's just kind of surreal and bonkers. And I thought of this. There are a whole bunch of Australian authors who I also think play with painful humor or dark humor, like seeing humor as a way into kind of understanding some of the messy stuff of life. And so I tend to gravitate towards some of those authors too, like Marcus Zuzak, Jack Moriarty. I'm not sure if I'm really answering the question. It's
no, totally.
No, you are.
It's not the only thing that I love. So, I tend to have a little bit of humor, I think, in other stories that I work on. But the project I'm working on now, my first novel, they do have moments of lightness, and the characters are kind of inquisitive and naturally a little witty at times, but the stories are more straight. This story was the one where I got to just be a little wild. In the acknowledgments, I put a thank you to my grandfather and my Uncle John. My Uncle John just passed about a year ago. Those were the two most warm, lovely, corniest men in the world. And I feel so blessed to have been partly raised by men who tell amazing grandpa jokes. So I hope that a little of their spirit comes through.
And I just love the use of humor, like Amanda was saying, for specifically a younger audience, for a young adult audience. It's refreshing to them. I can tell you, like, firsthand experience watching them be delighted by laughing with something that they're reading is so different and new for them. They're used to it coming from, video, basically, content. And so that I'm really excited to get my hands on so that kids can, the right kids especially, like, who need that kind of connection with literature. I think we'll be able to find that, and it's going to be nice. It opens up possibilities for them. Like, everything doesn't have to be doom and gloom or romance and love and light. Like, it can also just be like, sometimes the best jokes are in the darkest of times.
Or in these moments of
Yeah.
juxtaposition, things are
Right.
make sense, and they open up questions about the world. Like, why are we pretending that breathing is going to fix this massive gap in my heart? Or, I mean, breath work, lovely, but it's not by itself a solution.
Right. Well, yeah, it's like asking teachers, what's your why?
Right.
Why are you in the, yes, exactly. Okay. I've bird walked a little bit here. I have a question. Actually,
Mhm.
speaking of readers picking up your book, for our listeners out there who are either looking to get a hold of it themselves, to bring it to their own classrooms, after someone is done reading your book,
Uh-huh.
what do you want them to walk away with? What is it that you hope they have or learn or
Mhm.
have achieved?
It's funny. One of my writing teachers always said that the real difference in young adult fiction is there has to be some hope. It has to end in hope.
Mm.
I I don't know if I really think that. Personally, I steer clear of anything that's labeled heartwarming. Like, I just want things to be truthy. But I do think that this story, what I hope readers walk away with is a sense that healing is possible, a sense that you can find a new path forward even after a big disappointment or some unexpected twist.
Hmm.
Also, hope that it reinforces or kind of creates an idea of kindness, that you don't know what baggage the person beside you is carrying with them. And what can we all be doing to create a space that where it's a little easier to manage that baggage for one another?
That is something
Yeah.
that Marie and I we've been discussing this article that came out in The Atlantic about college kids who can't read, right? And like this whole revelation that's coming to light that we do need books. They teach empathy, and like the rest of the world has forgotten this, and we're like, that's what we've been saying all along. But that's exactly it, right? Like, these stories aren't necessarily required to end in hope, but the experience of reading it, the experience of living through it with a character,
Mm.
it reminds you about the other people in your life and like what they might
Hmm.
be experiencing. That just sounds like just another book to read to remember, right? Empathy and remember people. And so I guess this question is a little bit of a side, because our teachers not only share your books, but a lot of our teachers teach writing and they teach future writers. And how would you advise teachers, like what kind of support or advice would you give them to help them foster
Mm.
future writers?
That's such a big question.
I know, I'm
Because
sorry.
no, but I've thought about it because you warned me in advance a little bit.
I
I don't wanna be condescending because I know your listeners are all they've been at this for a while, and they probably think about writing in a lot of sophisticated ways. I think, I've coached a lot of young writers, both when I was teaching ninth grade and, one-on-one and in creative writing workshops. And I think my main takeaway over and over is that young people have big ideas that are worthy of story. You don't
know.
have to be alive for decades, and you don't have to, as a 15-year-old, write a story about a 45-year-old. You can write about what you have in your life, that there's so much material to mine. And I've worked with teens who are working on ambitious full length novels, and they're glorious. Like, are they going to be published next year? Probably not, but I mean, maybe. But I think that brings me to my other big takeaway, which is the importance of play. I think adults and teens, maybe less so younger kids, forget how important play is. And we get so obsessed with productivity, getting pages done, getting the perfect plot, getting something published, I mean, when you're an adult, it's getting the reviews, all of that. And I think we get ourselves stuck. And I've seen teenagers get stuck in that too. And sometimes it's really about backing up and just having fun with it, just doing kind of experimental activities with music, creating a playlist, scribbling on paper, creating a map, collecting pictures, Pinterest boards, whatever you need to kind of inspire your story and remember what it feels like for you. I use a lot of kind of wacky, creative, kinesthetic, talking to one another ways of working. I do that with adults too, because frankly, I think adults need it. So taking teens seriously, but also not being so serious all of the time, I think
Hmm.
are the two big ideas that I try to carry with me when I walk into a writing classroom.
I'm thinking about my own kids right now and about how I've had to remind myself of that, because my kids just kind of crossed over from daycare to early elementary school. So they've gone from play, play, play to learn, play to learn, play to learn, to now being in the system.
Mm.
And it's a brutal transition, especially as someone who has seen, right, the benefits of play-based learning, even though we're talking about big kids writing, but like even with the little ones, we know play-based is the best way for kids to learn anything. And then kind of seeing them shoved down the pipe of phonics and all this stuff, it's really hard to remind yourself of the benefits of play when you're in the system. It's really hard, but so important, especially with writing and being creative.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Oh my gosh.
I have to remind myself all the time too, but I take breaks. I create playlists for myself. I have a million little ways that I try to connect with my characters. And often just taking that time out, although it seems like a diversion from the task at hand, it opens things up in a way that I couldn't understand otherwise. One of my shortcuts for what comes after for a long time, I had trouble understanding the main character, Mari, like really getting into her heart. I tend to write girl characters who have a shell, who have a reason for a shell, and they don't let me in either. But one day, I must have been doing some kind of writing prompt. I got the idea that she was a very sad turtle. And I just had this picture of a turtle up against a rainy pane of glass as my screensaver for the longest time. So anytime I opened up my laptop, I saw this pathetic turtle, and it let me into her heart because that was where she was. And I could connect through a turtle. Like I got her in that moment. And I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't taken the time out to try some little writing prompts and think about animals and do things that were off the page.
Yeah, and mess up your vision, right? Like I think that the tighter you hold to a single vision, the harder it is to push through or to see anything else. I'll never forget when my creative writing professor, and I've done it with my own students, he taught us a sestina, taught us, to write sestinas, but then he said, "Wait a second." And he pulled out of a hat. We had all written down like our single like favorite words at the beginning of the hour, and he pulled 6 words from a hat, and those were the prescribed 6 words. So not only did we have to follow this rigid structure, but then we had like fart, spinal cord, vermilion, and like these like completely ridiculous words to now fit into a sestina, right? 6 lines, 6 stanzas, a strict order. And like the lesson was not only did we have to go home and write it and like make it work, what surprised you when you took all those crazy rules and then put a surprising element, you gamified it, right? He gamified the poem. We all ended up with some pretty crappy sestinas, but tons of offshoot ideas to see things differently. Like I can still remember some of those words and some of those like single lines that started other stories, that started other projects from destroying the rules of something that's typically very, very strict. So what a refreshing reminder, Katie. I
I
think I
love
could
that.
talk about this all
Anytime,
day.
anytime you can gamify it, I'm on board.
Right?
Pulling words out of a hat, pulling character, and just messing things up, monster mashing stories, whatever it is, it opens up all kinds of possibilities, and sometimes it opens up legit great ideas.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Marie and I call it when we're brainstorming, we call it, or our friend Ashley, it's like it's cleaning out the pantry, right? Like you got to take everything out and then see the mess
what you got.
in order to envision the way forward, or to ADHD walk away from it and be like, oh, my pantry's empty and we have no food.
Because it's all on the floor. Well, speaking of like the brainstorm and the process, Katie, what are you working on next?
I'm working on an adult novel. I guess in the real world, we just call those novels because that sounds. Whenever children's writers talk about novels for adults, we sound like we're talking about porn. But no, I'm writing a book that can be read by all ages. It's sort of a crossover. It has a young protagonist who's on the cusp of 13, her mom and her grandfather. And this family's trying to figure out a path forward in a community that's been ravaged by the climate crisis. It's a near future. I don't want to call it dystopian though, because it's warm, and each of them has a point of view on what the right thing is, whether it's defending their neighbors, taking care of the salt marsh, which is what the 13-year-old is obsessed with, or if it's getting out of Dodge and seeking safety. And they're all kind of valid but different ways of dealing. So I'm having fun with that one. It's a really soft, heartfelt book that's about some hard themes that a lot of folks are already facing and more of us are going to be facing.
And when is that coming out?
That one's not even with my agent yet. I've just
Okay.
working on it. So that one I'm hoping to send to her in the next month or so. I'm really excited about it.
That's really exciting. That is so cool. Okay. We're gonna finish up with one more question.
Okay.
What is, especially as a former English teacher, what is one thing that you wish all English language arts teachers knew?
Well, I think your listeners probably know a lot, so that it's also a daunting question. But I think sometimes we forget that books are about something bigger than the standards or the literary analysis tools or the specific curriculum goals that we have on the agenda. And it's really easy to kind of get sucked into teaching those specifics and not have time to remember that we all read for big reasons. And I think when you're young, you read for big reason, even bigger reasons. Sometimes it's entertainment, escape, kind of enjoyment. But a lot of times we're trying to understand ourselves a little bit better or ask some questions about the world or understand another person's experience and find those moments of insight. And I guess as a teen, I had a really hard time in English classes. I was a voracious reader, but I would not read authors who we had touched in English class because I felt like they'd been ruined.
Right. Yeah.
Strategic about which teachers I would go to, and I didn't want this author ruined for me. And I had some teachers who made reading wonderful, but we were just so obsessed with like literary devices, illusion, metaphor, and we weren't talking about the point of reading. So I guess I would just encourage listeners to remember that we need to read like humans, that we need to read like our lives depend on it, that books are really tools for telling our own stories, for kind of framing how we think about how we walk through the world, and to create some space for young people to authentically connect with story in that way.
I feel like
What a beautiful
I just
way to
want to
end
go.
this
I know. I just want to
conversation.
go read books with kids.
Yeah.
I wish that was the whole job.
Does independent reading still happen?
Oh, yeah.
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, there are some different, restrictions. Like for me, a lot of it is time. I work on a quarter system.
Okay.
And it is just like whiplash how quickly we have to go through or how quickly time goes, basically. And so
Yeah.
I have to be extremely strategic in the way that longer pieces make their way through our classroom. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's happening. And that's one of the things that we do here is we're trying to find all the different paths to meet all of the different situations and goals teachers have. And I think that, having these conversations that we're having with authors and talking about the heart of why we all kind of came to this field is so invigorating and renewing and exciting because it gives us the energy to go back and either rethink or confirm things that we already felt really good about. And we're constantly evolving here at the podcast. So we're so glad that you were part of that. Katie, if people were going to want to get a hold of you or look for copies of your books or different ways to have you maybe come do author visits and things, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you to do that?
Well, I am the only living Katie Bayerl on the internet. My last name is Bayerl. So if you look at katiebayerl.com or find me on Instagram or find me sometimes on Facebook or LinkedIn, my handle is always just at Katie Bayerl. The book is going to be everywhere. So after April 29th hits, it will be in all of your large bookstores, and independent booksellers and libraries will be able to get it too. So just having the title, What Comes After, and my name should be plenty there. But I'd love to connect with people if they're looking for creative writing classes by Zoom, or if they're on the East Coast and want to bring me in for a little bit. I do visit schools from time to time doing special writing workshops and residencies. So it's always fun to collaborate in that kind of a way too.
That's so cool. It's such a cool opportunity for students to be able to hear from more than the adults that they talk to every day. Like there's just something very special about that. So That is very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your stories and thank you for sharing your insight. I sincerely look forward to seeing if I can do some sort of a workshop at my school. I think I have a couple of teachers in my department in particular who do a lot of creative writing who I think would love to even just have like a Q&A where the kids get to, sit down and ask some questions and do some cool exercises. I think that would be very, very enriching for the children. But yeah, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's so good to meet both of you.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in Happy Hour and the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.